Well, I've got all kinds of questions for you about possession and all that fun stuff, but probably where we should start is if, as I promised, I will not summarize your book. So what does esteemed audience need to know about Small Town Monsters, which is available right now, and they could be adding it to their cart as they're listening to us?
Yes, so as I said, the book started as just imagining what it would have been like to be the daughter of demonologists. And I gave that to a Latin American family because, as many of you know, there are not a lot of Latin American horror novels or even not a lot of Latinx children's books. So I'm hoping to add a little representation to the genre. And the story features two characters, Vera and Max, who are growing up in a town called Roaring Creek, Connecticut, that has seen its fair share of tragedy. Vera is the daughter of the demonologist, and Max believes that there's something very wrong happening with his mother. And as he tries to seek out Vera's help while her parents are away on business, they start to realize that it may not just be his mother, and it may be something that's spreading through the entire town. And there is a heavy cult aspect in the book. In 2019, when I was writing it, NXIVM was really big, which is the cult that was sort of like a self-help group out of Albany, New York, that turned out to have a really dark underbelly where they were abusing women sexually and otherwise. And that was very much in my brain. It was also the run up to the election, which was a pretty dark year. So I had a lot of time thinking about groupthink during that time and how we were all on separate camps and absolutely convinced and believing what we believed and couldn't hear a word from the other side. Even if some of the things that people were believing were crazy conspiracy theories, they were locked into those beliefs. And I added some of those cult aspects to the novel as Vera and Max realize that what's happening to his mom is really much bigger than they ever thought.
NXIVM broke my heart just because Allison Mack was my dream woman from Smallville. Although I always thought the conflict of Smallville was Clark's an idiot. He wants to get with Lana the whole time, and Allison Mack, Chloe Sullivan, is right there. And I thought, well, eventually they'll reveal she's Lois Lane, and all my dreams will come true. And spoiler alert, that's not what happened. So that was
she was the villain of NXIVM. See, I was not a huge Smallville person. I'm not a huge superhero person. So I was more shocked when I watched the documentaries of how many faces, I did recognize her face, but how many other faces I recognized in like the wedding scenes from various TV shows I had seen. And I mean, if you just think of Scientology, I mean, Scientology has so many celebrities in it and how easy it can be to get wrapped up in that. When I was in college, I went to school in Boston. Boston is a huge college town. There's about 100 universities in the city limits. So there's all these 20-somethings walking around. One day I'm walking through Kenmore Square right by Fenway Park. And this kid who looks like a skater in the 90s, with the big baggy shorts and the dirty hair, stops me and he's like, hey, what are you doing tonight? You want to come hang out? And it was a pretty common thing, when you're a college student, to be stopped and invited to a party. And he's like, yeah, this group of friends and I are getting together and we do this cool thing. We have this personality test and it's really awesome. You can learn all about yourself. It's so fun. You'll meet some really cool people. Do you want to go? And I'm like, well, I was smart enough as a young woman to, no stranger danger and not just go with some random guy to his house. So of course I said no. I go back to the dorms and I found out that one of my friends did go with one of these guys. And it turned out it was Scientology. She shows up there and it was the first meeting to induct her into Scientology. And it was so easy to see how you could take that first step when all you were seeking was to hang out with a bunch of cool people and they seemed really nice and you're taking a Cosmo quiz, it's fun. You love those, don't you? And here you are at your first cult meeting.
Well, with something like, I don't know, Heaven's Gate or Waco, the Waco, Texas group, right? The Branch Davidians. It's like, yeah, well, fair enough. They're out in the middle of nowhere. There's not a whole lot going on. If the cable gets shut down, what else are you going to do with your time?
Yeah.
But when you're talking about, Alice and Mac and other celebrities, people who supposedly have it all on the ball, like, didn't you just come from some ridiculous Hollywood party? Why do you also need a cult? It's like, nope, I guess it's just susceptibility at all levels of society.
Yeah, and honestly, I listened to a lot of the actual NXIVM audio of their, I don't know what to say, sermons. I'm not sure of the videos of Keith Raniere speaking to his members and giving advice. I also listened to a lot of the Jonestown sermons, and Jim Jones, who was the Drink the Kool-Aid guy from the 70s. And we talked about evil and whether evil exists. When you listen to Keith Raniere of NXIVM, you could just hear a narcissist and somebody who believed that he was God, honestly, and every word he said just deserved to be followed. Whereas with Jonestown, there is an actual audio on YouTube, and I caution, this is like a trigger. Don't go looking for it if you don't want to hear it, of the actual moment where he is telling his 2,000 plus followers to drink the Kool-Aid. And it is the actual audio of them choosing to do it. And you can hear the crowd just getting quieter and quieter as they're slowly dying. And there are children in the crowd, there's crying, there's screaming. And his voice in this audio is the closest I've ever heard to true evil in the world. I mean, that listening to his voice convinces you that evil is a force. It's not just a person. Like, that is the closest you will ever hear to the devil, is coming out of this man's voice as he's convincing these people to kill themselves. And before 9/11, they said it was the single biggest incidence of mass death of Americans in history on one day. And that was Jonestown. And he convinced these people who initially joined a church in California and thought that they were going to do charity work, and he was healing the sick and could make people walk again. And for some reason, they followed him to those jungles and followed him until they drank poison, knowing they were drinking poison. And it is just really, really disturbing. It will convince you that evil exists.
It's one thing, of course, when a cult is, it's a specific organized group, and you get in and it's a questionnaire, and then slowly but surely, you're a frog in the pot. You don't realize the water is boiling until it's the command, hey, drink the Kool-Aid. I know they had run Kool-Aid drinking drills for a year or two beforehand, where that was eventually going to be the plan, so that when it actually was the plan, there were some who thought, well, this is just another drill. But that's one thing. But now that, we've seen what happens with Facebook, and getting back to disinformation, I've got relatives that I consider to be in a death cult because they won't get vaccinated, they won't get masked, they're reading QAnon nonsense, some of it disseminated through their church. If that's a cult, it's just a very big cult that's spread out across the country. Is that still a cult, or what is that? And how much of that horrifying thing that, you've been living in the same world I have for the past however many years where this has been happening, how much of that fed into Small Town Monsters?
A lot. That fed into it a lot. So I've been asked the question often, why do you think there are so many horror novels coming out right now? Because it does seem to be a big boom, not only in young adult, but even in adult, even in movies. There seems to be a huge horror boom coming out right now. I'm like, well, trace it back. The movies and the books coming out in 2021 were most often written in 2019. They were written during the run up to the election. And that was a really dark year. I know we all are focused on the darkness of 2020, but 2019, as we were all listening to what was going on Twitter on a daily basis, was a really dark year. And I'm logging onto Facebook, just as you said, and seeing people who I knew in real life, who I talked to at school reunions and had a lovely conversation with, who absolutely were convinced that Anderson Cooper drinks the blood of babies, and that Mother Teresa was sex trafficking children, and that Tom Hanks is a cannibal. And they were sharing this on Facebook with no shame or concern of who was going to see this, that people were going to think that this was crazy, you know, that this wasn't quite right. And I was just stunned and how they could wholeheartedly believe this. And even when it was proven false, even when you have things like Pizzagate that are proven to be completely false, does not shake your belief. You are still convinced in what you believe, even a million times over. When Trump was caught in a lie, you were still convinced that he tells it like it is and tells the truth. And it seemed to be nothing that was going to shake you, like scientific evidence of the coronavirus and the vaccines. So a lot of that did feed into the cult in Small Town Monsters, because it sort of starts as a town in a very dark place. And there had been a horrible tragedy in the town. Many of them are grieving, and they're looking for a group to make them feel better, a self-help group, a support group. And it was a mixture of that, of how a group that you join with the best of intentions can turn ugly, because that is one of the lines that came out of one of the NXIVM documentaries, which was a member said, nobody sets out to join a cult. None of us thought we were joining a cult. It's just by the time it became apparent to us, we had sunk in years of our lives and thousands of dollars, and it was just hard to see our way out of it. At the same time, I started to think about what would make you take that first step to join such an extreme self-help group that you are spending thousands of dollars, or you are believing something that goes against reasons. What would make you take that first step? And I figured you would have to personally be in a very dark place, something going wrong in your life. Let's face it, if everything's great and sunshine and roses, you're probably not out there seeking extreme self-help groups. And at that time, and you know, in the past 10 years or so, I've had friends or family who have sadly not only lost relatives, but lost children, you know, whether it be miscarriage or stillborn or sudden infant death. And these experiences were horrible and tragic. And watching them go through it was gut-wrenching. And as a parent, I remember thinking to myself, you would do just about anything to prevent this from happening. And how many people would offer up that prayer? I'll do anything. I'll do absolutely anything if you make this not happen. And what if you found out that that prayer was being answered by the dark place and not the good place? Would you still make that deal? If it's for your own kid, you very well might, you know, but what if you found out the adverse effects would be on other people, but it would save your own kid, but all these other people might be damaged? Would you still make that deal? And it's not totally cut and dry, black and white, on what you might do and what might get you to take that first step into a darker world.